Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here in time. My name is Martin Frick. I'm the Climate Change Director of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. And I'm actually jumping in for the first 30 minutes for David Nabarro, who has just been nominated the United Nations Secretary General Special Advisor on the 2030 agenda. We have a very interesting panel discussion here this morning, where we're looking at the INDCs and adaptation and mitigation measures from all angles, from a sub-state angle and also from a national state angle. For the first half of this panel, we will be looking into sub-state actors and what they can do to mitigate climate change and to adapt to climate change. Then we are very happy to have high-level panelists who are going to speak about their nation's INDCs, but we're coming to that later. And without much ado, I want to introduce Louis Blumberg to you. Louis is the director of the California Climate Change Initiative of the Nature Conservancy's California chapter, and he's going to run us through the first part of the side event. Louis, you have the floor.
Thank you, Martin, and welcome everybody. We're getting a little bit organized here. Excuse me. We have the computer. So welcome. We're glad to kick off this Global Landscape Forum. It's a pleasure. I've watched this grow for 9 years from Forest Day into what it is today. For those people sitting down, we have 2 seats up here in the front. First 2, they're yours. So we have, working with C4, we have merged our 2 sessions here. And as Martin pointed out, we're looking at landscapes and the role of landscapes in dealing with climate change. And as the emission reductions that we need get lower and lower, get tighter and tighter, we have to deal with landscapes. It's not an option, it's an imperative. And that's becoming clear over time. So we're going to explore that today. And there are multiple benefits that come from landscapes. And we're doing this in the context here today of the COP and the notion of an INDC, an intended nationally determined contribution. This is a new concept, and what does it mean? And we're going to explore a couple of different components, a couple of factors around this. And we see there's great opportunities through this to really promote the role of landscapes in climate change and climate action. So we're looking at this from 2 different perspectives. One is the scope of an INDC, and that'll be the focus around food security and agriculture and climate adaptation. We're also looking at it from the perspective of scale, and we're going to focus this first section on subnational action to address climate change through forest protection. And that's the scale here is really the question. You know, how will a nationally determined contribution incorporate efforts that are happening at the state scale, the regional scale, the provincial scale, and the municipal scale to address climate change into that national level? And that's not clear yet. And we see in the INDCs that have been submitted, there's a lot of reference to ecosystems, to forests, to agriculture, to adaptation, but how it all fits together is yet to really be determined. So we're going to explore that a little bit, and we're going to leave a lot of time for questions, and hopefully you'll have some ideas about how these things will come together, and we can have a good discussion here. So we know that from a subnational standpoint, what cities and states do is critically important. One UNDP report estimated that up to 80% of the emission reductions that we need will come from state and local actors. And we've seen within the United Nations over the last three years a much greater recognition of the role and the importance of subnational action. And there are many representatives here from states and provinces around the world that have come together. And we're going to hear more about that later from one of our speakers. And the focus that I've been working at the Nature Conservancy in California with the development of California's program has been around forest and natural climate solutions. And we look at nature as a powerful tool to address climate change. And we've been deconstructing the duality between mitigation and adaptation that we've inherited, and we talk about nature as reducing emissions, restoring carbon to the earth, and responding to the risk by building resilience. And using landscapes and nature, you can get all 3 benefits. Without further ado, we're going to provide some case studies today of action at the state level to address climate change through landscapes. And we're going to start Mr. Donde, yes. We're going to start with Maria Magdalena Ruiz Meja, is the Secretary of Environment and Regional Development of the state of Jalisco in Mexico. Previously, she served as the Secretary of Environment and Ecology for the city of Guadalajara. And so she has municipal and state level experience. So we'd like to welcome her, and we're going to get this PowerPoint going here in a minute. Hopefully.
Gracias. Un privilegio estar aquí con todos ustedes y compartir la experiencia que tenemos aquí en el estado de Jalisco. A mí me encanta siempre decir que soy orgullosamente jalisciense y mexicana, y en el contexto en el que nosotros vivimos sí me gustaría visualizar América como un continente que va de polo a polo, y que en este continente viven dos reinos biogeográficos planetarios, que es neártico y neotrópico, en donde se da el proceso de transición de estos dos grandes regiones bioplanetarias es en el estado de Jalisco y en el eje neovolcánico transversal. Entonces, en Jalisco tiene tanta alta diversidad biológica como Chiapas, como Yucatán, como Guerrero o Oaxaca, como uno de los estados de mayor diversidad biológica en un país megadiverso. En Jalisco podemos encontrar colibríes que vienen de las Alaska rocallosas o colibríes que vienen de Costa Rica. Podemos encontrar pumas o jaguares, podemos encontrar pájaros carpinteros o guacamayas. Es una síntesis ecosistémica de alta diversidad. El 60% de la superficie de nuestro estado es forestal, y de este 60%, el 80% es privado, son propiedades privadas, y el resto de las propiedades forestales se encuentra en comunidades ejidales o indígenas, que es un caso inverso a lo que sucede a nivel de lo nacional, en donde los bosques se encuentran en propiedades comunitarias o indígenas. En nuestro estado es al revés. También, bueno, compartirles que dentro de estos escenarios nosotros encontramos a Jalisco como uno de los estados con la degradación y pérdida neta forestal más grande a nivel de lo nacional después de Chiapas. Tenemos una alta pérdida de bosques, principalmente por el sector agropecuario que está propiciando un cambio de uso de suelo. Jalisco es el principal productor de huevo y leche a nivel de lo nacional, pero las vacas que producen esa leche y que nos ponen en el segundo lugar en el país como productores lecheros, nacen en los bosques secos, donde está este alto nivel de deforestación. Entonces, el sector de cambio de uso de suelo provee el 31% de las emisiones gases efecto invernadero que tiene nuestro estado, además de que el sector agropecuario tiene más del 24%. Entonces, en total, más del 50% de nuestras emisiones gases efecto invernadero vienen de la combinación de estos dos sectores. Bueno, con este contexto, entonces hay una imperiosa necesidad de trabajar precisamente a nivel de paisaje y con estas políticas concentradas a detener la deforestación, la degradación y el cambio de uso de suelo, y de allí que hicimos esta apuesta de trabajar en los mecanismos RED, de reducción de emisiones por degradación y deforestación, y hacer una apuesta precisamente en ver cómo estos índices precisamente de cambio climático los podíamos enfocar al territorio. Nuestras apuestas han sido varias, destacaría ahorita dos, que son trabajar en gobernanzas territoriales muy fortalecidas, que nosotros hemos hecho apuestas con las intermunicipalidades, donde hemos sumado a los municipios para que tengan una visión de cuenca y de manejo del territorio de manera estratégica. allí las intermunicipalidades de los 125 municipios que tenemos en el estado de Jalisco, ya tenemos organizados los de mayor riesgo y vulnerabilidad frente al cambio climático con esta visión de intermunicipalidad. Esta es una estrategia de trabajo. Y la otra es coordinar la importancia de el tema de… how many time do
I just wanted to announce there is translation. There are headsets outside if you have not gotten the headsets. Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Me dijeron que podía hablar español. Okay. My English is very bad.
Yes.
No, ¿está bien? Ok. Entiendo perfectamente, pero no lo puedo hablar nada. Bueno, los corredores biológicos es una estrategia porque nosotros tenemos un alto nivel de conectividad. Sierra Madre Occidental, Sierra Madre Sur, eje neovolcánico transversal, están confluyendo en este territorio y, como decía, somos una síntesis ecosistémica, pero también biocultural. Tenemos 2 etnias y todas las comunidades agrarias en los sistemas forestales. Entonces, allí es donde está nuestra apuesta. La apuesta es precisamente estar organizando estos procesos de concepto de corredor biológico, corredor biocultural con el manejo de la tierra y del territorio. Yo nada más diría de todo este contexto, ya tenemos aproximadamente el 10% de nuestro territorio en una categoría de área natural protegida. La prospección es generar un nuevo modelo que estamos trabajando con la Agencia Francesa de Desarrollo, con CONABIO, con CONAFOR y con las agencias nacionales y acompañamientos internacionales como GCF, en donde estamos haciendo apuestas para tener concentrado un modelo de desarrollo rural bajo en carbono y de economías locales, sobre todo en la sierra occidental de nuestro estado. Yo creo que lo más importante para compartir después, bueno, todo por supuesto es… estamos localizando no solamente la línea base, el nivel de deforestación, dónde está ahorita la sanidad forestal, cómo está el proceso del territorio a nivel de lo ecológico, sino también toda la visión económica y de economías. Estamos haciendo un diagnóstico de la situación tanto de pobreza, vulnerabilidad social frente al tema de economías y cambios climáticos como variables significativas para reconfigurar estas economías locales. El acompañamiento ya está terminándose a nivel de diagnóstico. La Agencia Francesa de Desarrollo junto con este grupo interdisciplinar estamos tratando de propiciar un nuevo modelo de área natural protegida voluntaria donde estén involucrados todos los actores, todos acepten este acuerdo, acepten un polígono donde el desarrollo rural bajo en carbono sea el proceso que nos ayude a reconfigurar la economía local. Se han diagnosticado productos basados en el bosque, pero también lo no forestal, destacando el mezcal, que es como un tequila, pero más silvestre, así como, por supuesto, producción de café orgánicos y procesos de frutas orgánicas a nivel de transformación. Podría decir que ha sido un trabajo que lleva más de 2 años, el tema no ha sido nada fácil, el sector más difícil que hemos tenido para trabajar es el agropecuario, ha sido el más difícil de trabajar, los otros sectores, el sector forestal y los sectores no forestales sí han estado trabajando con nosotros, sin embargo, el que más difícil se nos ha hecho sentar a la mesa y generar estas políticas ha sido el agropecuario. Cerraría ya diciendo que es una prospección, somos un gobierno que ya está en la mitad del proceso, tenemos todavía 3 años de trabajo, entonces hay una apuesta significativa de este acompañamiento. Nos hemos arropado con agencias internacionales y allí el grupo de gobernadores por el clima y los bosques ha sido clave para nosotros porque compartimos plataformas, experiencias, pero también arropamos estas políticas que hacia adentro del territorio con los actores cuesta mucho trabajo con este carácter internacional. Con esto ya dejo mi primera intervención y pues agradezco mucho que me hayan invitado.
Thank you, Minister. Okay, our next speaker, I'm going to ask you all to come to the podium, speakers here, so the people on the floor might be able to at least see the top of your head. So we'd like you to speak from here. And so the next speaker is Ken Alex. Ken is Special Advisor to California Governor Jerry Brown. He's also the Director of the Office of Planning and Research, and formerly he was the head of the Environmental Unit in the State Attorney General's Office for many years. Mr. Alex, thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. It's interesting to talk to a group of self-selected people who already recognize and understand the importance. Can you hear? Is this on? Yeah. Okay. Who recognize and understand the importance of landscapes and come here and tell you how important it is to pay attention to landscapes and land use. So I hope we start with that as a given. But having said that, it's not a given outside of the halls that we're walking in today when we go back to our various countries and states and cities. And we have a lot of work to do. So in California, we have an ambitious and aggressive economy-wide program to reduce emissions throughout the entire state. 40% below 1990 emission levels by the year 2030, and then 80% by 2050. And there are 5 elements to our plan to do so, and I won't go into the 5, but one of the 5 is to ensure that working and natural lands are sinks for carbon rather than sources. And right now in California, to the best of our knowledge, they are sources. So we have quite a lot of work to do. And what I wanted to do is just give you a little sense of California. You'll all want to visit Jalisco and California and Acre by the time we're done, because we'll give a little plug for what our landscapes look like. And hopefully you'll do that. And then talk briefly about a few of the actions that we're taking on different landscapes and in different ways than perhaps you might think about it, in addition, forest and other landscapes. So California is about 33% forest land, and about 30% grasslands, pasture, shrub, 10% farmland, 4% urban, and the rest is desert, which has its own set of issues. So the sources of emissions from those lands, similar to, I would say, the rest of the world, certainly in forested lands, a lot of the emissions are from fires. We have somewhat less of an issue with deforestation than in other parts of the world, but it's not irrelevant. And also the conversion of forest lands to agriculture and the conversion of agricultural lands to developed lands. There's a study that's very interesting for those of us who think about this in California, that says that if you convert agricultural land, at least in a certain county in California, to developed land, you increase emissions by about 40 times, which is not shocking, but it's important to recognize that the conversion of open space agricultural land is hugely impactful from a climate perspective. So let me give you quickly a couple of examples of some of the things that we're doing. The first is the most basic. We are developing a full inventory of lands and emissions from lands so that we have a baseline. And it is not as easy as you might hope. And we're spending quite a lot of time and energy trying to figure out exactly the appropriate methodology for that inventory. and where to go once we make those determinations in evaluating what the emission profile is going forward, and how we're going to be sure that we're either a sink or a source, given what the land use is and what's happening on that land. So we're spending quite a lot of time, and in fact, Lewis and the Nature Conservancy are helping with that effort, and we're grateful for that help. What we learn in California, I think, will be valuable around the United States and probably around the world, so we hope to have that within the next few months in a form that's publishable in some ways. Next, California, as many of you may know, has been subject to a pretty profound drought over the last 4 years. The current estimate is that we're going to lose 100 million trees to the drought, and we're having to deal with that. That is a potential significant source of emissions. We are now taking efforts to turn a fair amount of those dead trees into compost and biochar, and thinking about what the strategy would be to benefit soils. I think somebody else on our panel today will talk about this, but one thing that's happening in California that I suspect you'll be hearing about quite a lot more in the next couple of years is some science that shows an incredible benefit of composting agricultural lands and grazing lands. There's some estimates from Professor Wendy Silver at UC Berkeley that suggests that California could offset 100% of its emissions if it composted a significant portion of farmland and grazing land. That is an astonishing idea, and there's something called the Marin Carbon Project, which is in Marin County near San Francisco, that is working on pilot projects to establish whether this is in fact the case. And so far, the evidence is very positive that composting grazing land has enormous benefits for carbon sequestration and for retaining water and soil, which in a drought situation is incredibly important. So this is something that, as the state, we're looking at quite in detail to see if we can make a lot of progress on this particular approach. And it also gets at the idea of having sort of cradle-to-grave concept, because the compost primarily comes from agricultural waste. So you turn the agricultural waste into compost, you avoid putting it into landfills, you avoid the methane release from that organic waste, you put it back into the soil, and the other nice aspect of it is that it lasts at least 30 years as a carbon sequestration application in soil. So we're very interested in this, and it's something we're spending some time on. Let me switch gears, because one of the things that we've learned in California is that land use has a huge impact on things like transportation emissions. So California, with 38 million people, we travel more in cars than anyone in the world. I don't say that proudly, but we have 332 billion vehicle miles traveled a year in California, and it's 93 million miles to the sun, so you can do the math on how many trips to the sun Californians are able to take a year. The result is 40% of emissions in California come from transportation, and we need to change that, and so we have quite a lot of policies to look at doing transit-oriented development, having higher densities in urban areas in an effort to use less land for development, and that will help preserve agriculture and forest. And the last thing I want to talk about is that we are also trying very much to consider and promote landscape scale thinking on an international scale. Both Acre, Brazil, and Jalisco, Mexico, and California are part of something called the Under 2 MOU, which is an effort by subnational governments around the world to promote greater ambition among nations here in Paris in the process for international reduction of emissions. All of us who've signed on, and now there are 65 jurisdictions, and by the end of the COP we expect there will be about 100, representing 23% of world GDP, by the way, about $18.5 trillion. Part of that agreement is to really focus on land use and tropical forests as an issue. At least 20 of the 65 signatories right now are from tropical forest states. And so this is part of the INDC set of issues for the United States, for Brazil, for Mexico, and for around the world. So we want to underscore how important it is, and again, I know that most of you already know that or you wouldn't be here, but it's important that we spread that message, and that's part of what the Under 2 MOU is about, to make sure that jurisdictions around the world pay attention and growing attention to the role of land use and landscapes in reducing emissions. So, Louis, with that, I think I'll stop.
Thank you, Ken. So we're going to have plenty of time for questions, so make some notes as the speakers are talking. And I'm starting to hear already a couple of themes around soil and multiple benefits. So those kinds of things we may want to talk about a little bit later. Our next speaker has been working in Acre, Brazil. And as Ken pointed out, Acre and Jalisco and California are all part of the Under 2 MOU. And they're all also part of the Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force. And that group has promulgated the Rio Branco Declaration, which is another effort to collect pledges for emission reductions. So let me introduce to you Alberto Tavares, known as Dande. He's an economist and been working in Brazil for quite some time, and he now is the director of the development company of environmental services in the Brazilian state of Acre. Welcome, Dande. And please speak from the podium so they can, yeah, from here, please. So the people in the back, at least on the floor, could see the top of your head, perhaps, yes.
Good afternoon. Yo voy a hablar español porque mi inglés es demasiado marginal. Se podría hablar portugués, pero yo voy mi junta a Jalisco, entonces estamos hermanados por una lengua latina. Bueno, el estado de Acre, no sé cuántos le conocen la historia más reciente, pero estamos ubicados en la Amazonía de Brasil, en la parte sudeste. Estamos muy cerca del Perú y Bolivia. Acre tiene 87% de su cobertura de bosques, o sea, tenemos una mayoritaria área de bosques y hace más o menos 15 años Acre empezó un conjunto de políticas muy avanzada en términos de, con el objetivo de buscar añadir valor a sus bosques. En lo mismo tiempo que nosotros buscamos utilizar las áreas que ya están abiertas y ya están deforestadas. Acre en este tiempo ha logrado un exitoso resultado de mantener sus bosques y al mismo tiempo implementar una política de desarrollo económico y con la inclusión social muy exitosa en Brasil. Podemos decir que tenemos resultado que es 50% del estado bajo las áreas protegidas, o sea, se han creado la mayoría de en los últimos 15 años. Estamos con 14 etnias de pueblos indígenas y que se juntan con los pueblos de bosque que son los extractivistas, o sea, aquellos que manejan los bosques, sean los procesos de producción de maderables y no maderables. Acre ha también marcado por su proceso reciente con un marco legal, con una ley que ha creado el primero programa de Red Plus jurisdiccional de Brasil. Y desde 2010 ya está siendo implementado y también hace parte de la Task Force de GCF, o sea, con otros 26 estados subnacionales que tienen bosques y que buscan las alternativas de desarrollo sin comprometer sus estoques de bosque. Acre está también con una relación muy próxima del estado de California, con un MOU que han asignado en el año 2010, juntamente con el estado de México de Chiapas. Y también Acre es el primero estado subnacional que ha hecho un contrato con el programa Red for Early Movers, con el banco KfW de Alemania. O sea, estamos en proceso de concluir la primera fase de implementación de este programa que busca apoyar este proceso de implementación de un programa jurisdiccional de Red Plus y sobre todo tiene acciones en las áreas de bosques, pero también en las áreas abiertas. Acre es también parte, como ha mencionado Ken, de Under 2 MOU, o sea, es esta ambiciosa iniciativa que busca movilizar estados para un proceso robusto de reducción de las emisiones, para contribuir con el proceso de se mantener las metas de reducción de gases. Bueno, Acre está completamente alineado, o sea, con las INDCs de Brasil, que recién se fueron informados por el gobierno nacional de una meta de reducir 37% de los gases hasta 2025 y 43% hasta 2030. Y sobre todo con una ambiciosa meta de recuperación de áreas degradadas, por lo menos 15 millones de hectáreas y 12 millones de reforestación y recomposición de bosques. ¿Por qué Acre está alineado con estas metas? Sobre todo porque en Acre ya estamos con acciones muy intensas de protección de los bosques, y una estrategia que podemos decir que es como una estrategia sinérgica entre las áreas de bosques y áreas abiertas, o sea, en un manejo completo de la paisaje del territorio. Tenemos un proceso que al mismo tiempo acciones intensas de manejo de bosques para productos maderables y no maderables, como la tradicional producción de Brazilian Nut y açaí berry, y también de rubber, o sea, de la goma, que es un producto tradicional de la región. En el mismo tiempo que en los 13% de las áreas abiertas nosotros estamos buscando trabajar un proceso de producción de proteína animal diversificada, no solamente con la ganadería, como tradicionalmente Acre en los últimos 30 años debía creciendo muchísimo, pero el gobierno ha decidido hacer un proceso de diversificación de esta producción con animales de pequeño porte, o sea, el uso también de los recursos acuáticos. O sea, Acre ha introducido una ambiciosa producción de pescados de agua dulce, y se hace 4 años está teniendo muy éxito en este proceso, porque muchos de los ganaderos han empezado a cambiar sus inversiones antes en ganadería y ahora en la piscicultura, o sea, la acuicultura. Y también introducimos otras cadenas, sea como de suinocultura y de avicultura también. O sea, creemos que un proceso que tenga su garantía de áreas protegidas, 50% del territorio, que tenemos las inversiones en producción de productos de los bosques, que tenemos también la producción intensificada con alta tecnología e industrialización para añadir valor a los productos de bosques y las áreas abiertas. Tenemos un proceso de una legislación para apoyar la dinamización de servicios ambientales. Creemos que es una estrategia que está pasando muy fuerte porque ha atingido en los últimos 10 años una reducción de más de 60% de la tasa de deforestación, y incluido el último año, desde 2014 a 2015, Acre ha registrado también una reducción de 10% de su tasa de deforestación. O sea, en lo mismo tiempo que nosotros incrementamos nuestro GDP, o sea, lo mismo tiempo que nosotros reducimos la presión sobre los bosques, hay un proceso también de aumento de la economía y sobre todo también con un proceso de justicia social. Acre ha salido de indicadores sociales muy atrasados, en una posición muy atrasada en términos de otros estados de Brasil. En los últimos 15 años ha pasado a los primeros puntos, por ejemplo, con la educación y los indicadores también de salud. Entonces, creemos que no es solamente una cuestión de conservación, pero Acre ha implementado un proceso exitoso de desarrollo económico en lo mismo tiempo que hace la conservación y la justicia social. Entonces, nos quedamos muy encantados de estar aquí compartiendo un poco de la experiencia y nos ponemos en la disponibilidad para clarear los puntos que sean necesarios.
Thank you, Donde. So as you can see, there is a lot of activity. We've just given you a lot of activity at the subnational level. We've just given you 3 case studies. All of these jurisdictions, Jalisco, California, and Acre, Brazil, they're all working hard. They have ambitious programs that are multiple complex programs with emission reduction goals, and they're dealing with social issues. And they propose a challenge, really, to the nations as they look at their INDCs to say, how can they capture this activity? How can they fold that into their INDCs in a way that is meaningful and helps the countries fulfill their pledges? Because these state actors have not been waiting for their national governments to act. They've been very busy, and that's really the message we wanted to get across with this first part of this panel. Now we're going to shift. I'm going to call up Martin here, who's going to moderate the next section of this panel here, and we'll talk about some other issues around the INDCs at the next scale. And we'd like the speakers to speak from the podium again still for the people on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis, and thank you for a great moderation. That is going to be a 15-second intervention because I'm just taking this microphone and handing it over to David Nabarro. David, I already introduced yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Martin. And hello and good afternoon to everybody. I'm David Nabarro, and I'm joining Luis as co-moderator of this session, and I am extremely pleased to be here. I work in United Nations on issues to do with food security, nutrition, and increasingly now on the taking forward of the Sustainable Development Goals and of the Climate Action Agenda with the Secretary General from now onwards. Now, I'd like to just spend a moment or two saying what we're going to do in this second part. We're going to look at the INDC of Uruguay, and we're going to try to go into that in a little bit of detail. recognizing that the INDCs are a novel approach, bottom up, and having the chance to explore with the Minister, who I shall introduce in a second, some of the issues in this INDC. The Minister will speak in Spanish, and we have interpretation. Then with Patrick Caron, the Director of Research and Strategy in CIRAD here in France, we're going to look at the links between what happens at local level, at national level, and at international level, again with this overall theme of how bottom-up or country-up planning to deal with issues around climate change, especially when we're focusing on landscapes, can accumulate and become a force of going to scale. It is with great pleasure that I now invite Minister Tabare Aguirre Lombardo to come to this place here and to speak to you. Minister Lombardo is Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries for Uruguay since 2010. He is an agronomist. He comes from the University of the Republic of Uruguay, and he has been involved in sugar, in rice, and in cattle, himself doing cattle production in northern Uruguay. The Minister has led the design and implementation of policies that reinforce a sustainable intensification pathway for agriculture in Uruguay. And actually, if we look at the Uruguayan INDC, it is extraordinary because it includes both a commitment to mitigation, focusing especially on livestock, but also a strong focus on support for adaptation. Senor, bienvenidos, welcome, and you have the floor. Perhaps about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we can have some discussion. Okay? Gracias.
Gracias. Buenos días. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Me gustaría, de lo más general a lo más particular, que siempre es bueno cuando vamos a referirnos a experiencias muy particulares de los distintos países, siempre es bueno tener en cuenta a qué juego estamos jugando y bajo qué reglas. En primer lugar, las INDC no son otra cosa que un instrumento adicional al servicio de un conjunto de normas que pretenden ayudarnos como integrantes del Convenio Marco de las Naciones Unidas para el Cambio Climático a encontrar los equilibrios que nos permitan alcanzar el deseado acuerdo y romper ese paradigma que nos lleva directo a la catástrofe. Esas negociaciones llevan ya muchos años y pocos avances, y por lo tanto creo que es muy claro que las situaciones son muy diversas, los intereses son muy fuertes y podríamos, y paso al segundo término general, como país productor de alimentos, ampararnos en uno de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, que es el de la seguridad alimentaria. Es decir, nosotros no podemos pensar en soluciones al cambio climático que no estén jerárquicamente subordinadas a cumplir con esa meta de satisfacer la seguridad alimentaria. Un país como Uruguay podría no hacer nada, pero tenemos un compromiso muy fuerte por dos razones. Por razones éticas, pero además por razones muy interesadas y egoístas que tienen que ver con los efectos que el cambio climático tiene sobre nuestros sistemas de producción. Por lo tanto, Uruguay plantea un conjunto de metas en sus INDC que tienen que ver con disminuir las emisiones de diferente manera. En Uruguay, el sector agropecuario es responsable del 68% de las emisiones. porque somos un país de 3,5 millones de habitantes y 12 millones de vacas y 8 millones de ovejas. Porque somos un país de renta media con un ingreso que está definido en buena medida por la agricultura y el agronegocio, que explica, si lo analizamos en toda la cadena, algo así como un 25% del Producto Bruto, es decir, el sector agropecuario y todos sus encadenamientos. Y en segundo lugar, porque estamos convencidos que el Uruguay, que somos 3 millones de habitantes y produce alimentos para 28 millones de habitantes, tiene capacidad de alimentar a 50 millones de personas de una forma sostenible si cuidamos los equilibrios que tenemos que cuidar entre ambiente y agronomía. En el mundo, el tercer concepto que quiero dejar definido antes de entrar concretamente a lo de Uruguay, recordemos que la agricultura explica el 14% de las emisiones globales. Porque a veces parece que la agricultura fuera el problema y en realidad la agricultura puede ser parte de la solución, pero no es parte importante del problema. La agricultura es un sector que merece ser considerado especialmente porque además sus emisiones son de origen biológico, en buena medida, porque las soluciones técnicas a la reducción de esas emisiones no siempre son fáciles y porque si nosotros no aceptamos que una humanidad de 9.300 millones de habitantes va a necesitar más alimentos que los que producimos hoy, no podremos aceptar y entender que en realidad las emisiones globales de la agricultura a nivel planetario no van a disminuir, van a aumentar. Lo que tenemos que preocuparnos es de disminuir la intensidad de las emisiones, es decir, buscar la máxima eficiencia para que cada producto alimenticio que se produzca tenga una reducción menor. Con ese background, Uruguay define una política que nosotros llamamos de intensificación sostenible, que se basa en 4 pilares: biodiversidad, eficiente uso del agua, conservación de suelos, porque los suelos son la base de todo, y protección del clima y protección al clima y del clima, lo que es lo que nosotros llamamos el doble juego de mitigación y adaptación al cambio climático en Uruguay. El 65% de la superficie del Uruguay son pastizales naturales y el 10% de la superficie del Uruguay son bosques. La mitad de ellos son bosques nativos, naturales, que son protegidos por ley desde el año 1990. Es decir, los bosques naturales en el Uruguay fueron protegidos en el año 1988 y por una disposición están especialmente conservados desde el año 1990, a tal punto que la superficie de bosque nativo en Uruguay ha aumentado. Por lo tanto, nuestro problema es bien diferente con respecto a otros países donde ha habido una deforestación para darle paso a la agricultura. En segundo lugar, esos pastizales naturales no siempre fueron bien manejados y por lo tanto hay una especial oportunidad de aumentar el secuestro de carbono de los suelos manejando bien los pastizales. Y esa es una de las estrategias a desarrollar. Pero la política más importante que hemos impulsado y que hoy está aplicada en el 95% de la superficie de tierras cultivables del Uruguay, 1,5 millones de hectáreas, que tienen su uso regulado en función de la prevención de la erosión hídrica. El principal problema ambiental en Uruguay es la erosión de los suelos. Uruguay validó la ecuación universal de pérdida de suelo que se desarrolló en la Universidad de Indiana en la década del 60 en Estados Unidos. La hemos ajustado a nuestras condiciones y hoy los agricultores y sus técnicos deben presentar un plan de rotación que garantice que la erosión tiene una tolerancia de tantas toneladas, X toneladas por hectárea. Esa política se monitorea por imágenes satelitales y se fiscaliza con sanciones que van desde inicialmente un apercibimiento a una sanción que puede llegar al valor de la tierra. ¿Por qué es importante esto y qué tiene que ver con las INDC? porque nosotros no vamos a tener una agricultura que mantenga el carbono original o que secuestre el carbono en suelos degradados si no tenemos suelos en equilibrio. Si estamos hablando de agricultura, estamos hablando de suelos. Si estamos hablando de INDC en agricultura, tenemos que encontrar de qué forma las distintas políticas pueden cumplir cobeneficios. La buena noticia es que en la mayoría de las situaciones productivas del país hay un espacio importante a transitar para producir más. Produciendo más, tenemos una economía con un balance positivo de carbono y no con un balance negativo de carbono, pero sobre todo tenemos una eficiencia mucho mayor y reducimos la intensidad de las emisiones. Que reitero el concepto, el planeta no va a dejar de comer, tiene que comer a partir de procesos que sean más eficientes. En ese sentido destaco como políticas los planes de suelo, y ya termino, los planes de suelo, la política vinculada con el agua, las políticas de promoción hacia el mejor manejo de los pastizales y los desarrollos de investigación en materia genética y biotecnológica que apuntan a mejorar la eficiencia de estos procesos. ¿Cómo juega el sector privado? De todo lo que hablé, hay cosas que son leyes y hay que cumplirlas. Los bosques nativos no se pueden afectar y los bosques artificiales se tienen que realizar un manejo que esté de acuerdo a este tipo de tareas. Uruguay hoy es anhídrido carbónico neutral. Si miramos los gases, en anhídrido carbónico Uruguay secuestra más por sus bosques que lo que emite. Es cierto, somos 3 millones de habitantes. Es decir, en Uruguay tenemos 4 vacas por habitante y media hectárea de bosques por habitante. Es relativamente fácil para un país de esa característica enfocar eso. Lo que tenemos que hacer es cómo aprovechar esa capacidad para intensificar nuestra provisión de alimentos sin perder esa eficiencia. ¿Cómo se manejan bien los pastizales naturales? Ahí se requiere una política de estímulo importante. Y es por eso que en nuestras INDC separamos los objetivos a partir de definiciones nacionales de aquellos objetivos que requieren medios de implementación. Los países agrícolas, que son los que sufren más que ninguno los efectos del cambio climático, requerirán recursos para enfrentar sus procesos de adaptación. La adaptación es un concepto mucho más difícil de analizar y de proyectar que el de la mitigación. Se me terminó el tiempo, ¿no? ¿The time is over? Gracias.
Lots of food for thought in that. I could see some of you looking at each other thinking, this is really interesting because it does combine so many different elements, adaptation and mitigation. It includes a focus on in the legal context and enforcement of laws, partnership with the private sector, and then some of the challenges of implementing adaptation strategies because they cost money. Thank you again, Minister. That was great. And now, bringing up the discussion of the panel to its conclusion before we start open conversation, is Patrick Caron, who is the Director of Research and Strategy at the French Institute for Agricultural Development. I've got to know Patrick in the last few years and found him to be a very special person because he can combine an ability to practice science with the capacity to communicate and to communicate not just his experience as a scientist, but also what he's seen when he's worked in his scientific project, for example, in Brazil and in Botswana. Now, Patrick's also got one other key role that I'm working with him on, which is as chairing the steering committee of the high-level panel of experts for food security and nutrition that advises the Committee on World Food Security. So it's really a special privilege, Patrick, to invite you now to come up here and give us your 10 minutes. And it says here you're going to speak in English, but I think we're prepared for you to speak in whatever language comes easiest.
Thank you, David. Well, good afternoon. Buenos dias, bon dia. The title is very exciting, and I'd like to thank Nature Conservancy, and GFAO for this excitement and this exciting moment. It all begins at home, stressing that local and innovation is really the starting point. And in the same time, it doesn't end at home, and linking home with other scales. And as we are looking at INDC, there is at least one big challenge we have to talk about. And I guess that was one of the intention of behind the panel. There are two challenges, in fact, that I understood them. One is innovation is fragmented and implemented at the local level by stakeholders, by farmers, by forestry people, and so on. And in the same time, we have to refer to at the national level through INDC. How can you connect the local level and the national level? And both ways, not only to account for, but in the same time to implement policy framework that make it possible to act at the local or subnational level. And the second very big challenge is we are here in Paris, and we are with this UNFCCC conference to look at climate. And behind INDC, there is a very strong commitment and engagement towards mitigation. But we know, as agriculture, it was said, is one of the key sector to look at mitigation. We know that we cannot disconnect adaptation and mitigation. And we have to look as well as adaptation for very different reasons. First of all, we all know, and that's part of the IPCC reports, that the most vulnerable, the most affected are the poor people. And we know that they will suffer, and we have to increase resilience at this particular level. And we know that there are synergies, but there are as well trade-offs between mitigation and adaptation. And we have to look at that in one way that makes it possible to look at them in the same time, trade-offs and synergies, and looking at one of the key issue, which is adaptation for the reason I said, and probably the link between them. Well, once I've said so, my background and my institution is a research institution. So we are committed together with partners in 90 countries in the world. We are committed to look at innovation and to stimulate innovation and to design techniques and to design technologies. I could provide quite a lot of examples that have been referred to so far. Conservation, agriculture, agroforestry, sustainable forestry management practices. I will refer to a particular one that has been launched last week, well, this week, last Monday indeed, which was called 4 pour 1000, 4 per thousand, 4 per mille, which is with the following rationale. Well, agriculture has been kept aside negotiation so far. And one way it's just a paradox, and it's just impossible to think forward with keeping it outside of the negotiation. But in the same time, we can look at agriculture not only as the 14% responsible, or 24 if you consider land use related issues, like last IPCC report has said, but we can look at agriculture as a way to be committed with the reduction of such emissions. And the 4 pour 1000 rationale is the following. If we succeed in sequestrating 4 per thousand, well, let me say this way, if we succeed in increasing the stock of carbon in the soil of 4 per thousand per year, then we compensate all emissions of greenhouse gases for all sectors. Well, I'm not saying it's feasible and it has to be said to be done tomorrow. But the contrary, if we lose this stock, then we double the emission. And then this makes it much easier to think about how agriculture, when I say agriculture, forestry, livestock, can commit themselves in doing that. But back to the innovation process, we know that if we look at the possibility of agriculture to play mitigation, but not only mitigation, behind 4%, it's increasing the carbon stock in the soil. It's not just like putting a big block of carbon. It's also increasing fertility. It's also increasing biodiversity in the soil. So it's increasing the possibility of increasing production, of addressing food security and resilience of farming systems. But then what we are sure about is that all these techniques will be implemented, first of all, at the household level, at the plot level, at the household level. But once we say so, whether it's conservation agriculture, agroforestry, integration of livestock and agriculture, forest sustainable management, when we say that, we have to take into account that it's not only every farmer who would be responsible for that. And I would like to draw the attention on something which is very hard to translate from English to French, although the English word is existing. It would be much easier in Spanish or Portuguese. I think that's the Latin language community, which is the word territory. Territory, by definition, means something like, well, a part of space which is bounded and which is with a high identity mark, and in the same time which has institutions that are governing this territory. It's not necessarily a local government or a government. It might be, but not necessarily. And it's difficult to translate because the word territory in English means something slightly different. If I can look for a translation, it would be much more the word that makes the links between community and landscape. Or some of my French colleagues begin to name it peoplescape instead of landscape. But, well, I would rather use the connection between both. And looking at territory might be interesting in the sense that it's a level of organization that is sometimes relevant to implement new activities. We discussed the issue of land use at the local level. This is not at the farm or the household level that it has to be thought or implemented. That could be at the level of a territory. Territory is also useful because it's a space where you have to, where you can learn, where you can experiment, where you can exchange among farmers. And it is also the level where you can implement new types of rules. Think about land use related issues in terms of grassland management or forest management. That could be a very useful scale. And then it is a very active, whether it is a local government or not, it is a very active and powerful way of looking at how you can feed into an INDC, how you can commit a whole community to bring into the national level both their contribution, but as well a place for policy dialogue. Just before finishing and having made this plea for the territory level and as a way of a scale, a particular scale, I would like to emphasize that I would not think about territory as the only level. It's not, the big challenge is to succeed and achieve connecting these different levels. The household, the territory, the local government, and the globe, because INDC have been thought about to feed into and to commit into a global agreement. And personally, I don't like the expression scaling up. That would mean to experiment at the local level and then to replicate and to duplicate. No, we have to think in a consistent way of which are the different actions that have to be taken at these different scales to make it possible to address not only the climate change objectives, but the objectives that were adopted at the General Assembly of the UN in September, the whole 17 Sustainable Development Goals that are all connected. And in 2 sentences, if David allows it, I'd like to, as David refers to this HLPE committee, I'd like to say I'm a scientist, and I'm advocating for a science that is impact-oriented and solidarity-oriented, and to make it sure that the connection and the commitment of science can be effective, we have to look at technology design, innovation, but as well as being part of innovation with also other stakeholders, making evidence and sharing evidence with all other type of stakeholders, thinking about the question of metrics, which is not a straightforward. We don't know exactly, that was said by Minister of Agriculture. We do not know the connection between a specific agricultural practices and how it impacts on food security and resilience. So we have to work on that. And last, and I will finish with that, a science that is committed as well with diplomacy and policy making agreements. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, Luis, are you okay if I help do the discussion part? But there's a big group here, and if you've got line of sight up there and you see people wanting to come in, I hope you will help me with that.
Just remember the people on the pit, on the floor.
Hello, people on the floor. That's great. Thank you, Luis. And so the reason why this particular event is so fascinating for me as one of the people who is trying to bring all the elements together, particularly the relationship between climate change and sustainable development, is that it is focusing on the extremely practical issues of how to address climate issues at the state level or at the community level, or as Patrick Caron just said, at the territory. And within this, there are some political issues that you've heard about, there are some technical issues that you've heard about, and there's also quite often institutional issues, different parts of government, farmers' organizations and others working together. So I would like very much for those of you present here to share your observations, those that have been stimulated by the discussion, but also any of your own personal points of view about how commitments at the subnational level can come together for being part of a national commitment, and secondly, how adaptation actions and non-mitigation benefits can be integrated alongside the mitigation work, as you heard from Minister Lombardo when he was talking. So who would like to start? We've got microphones, and we would love to hear, especially from the people sitting on the floor, who will be given priority if they show they want to speak. Okay, so that's great. The gentleman who just received his mic from Luis is starting, and then gentlemen, if you would come number 2, that would be great. Number 3 over there. Sir, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please speak briefly.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Tungarai. I'm from Nepal, and it's very, encouraging to hear so many good points from different countries. And I was really delighted to hear that the state of Acre has 87% of forest cover, and you have a very high ambition to reduce your emission from 37% to 40% by 2030, and you have also very, said that you are promoting reduced pressure on forestry and increase GDP at the same time, also ensure social justice and the conservation. Having said that, I have a question to you, and I'm very much encouraged by the statement of scientist Patrick that it should be, the INDC should be impact and solidarity oriented. At this very line, how could you been able to reflect your initiation and INDC initiatives in regard to the livelihood and the practice and the values of forest-dependent communities, indigenous peoples, and local communities, which are very much, contributing or very much contribute to the less emissions reduction and very much in line with the emission reduction practices, but their livelihood and their practices are less contributing to climate change, but very much related to the concept we're talking about here. Have you been able to talk to them, and have you been able to link those values and those things in your INDC? Thank you very much.
Dhanyabad, Mr. Raiji, Nepal Batamansi Aigo.
Thank you very much, Dhanyabad.
I'm going to suggest that we take 3 or 4 questions, and then we will invite relevant panelists to speak. Gentleman in the blue shirt, please introduce yourself.
Yeah. Loic Lopez, good afternoon. I'm from this planet, as all of you are too. I love those types of gatherings when we look at champion projects. But I would like to ask the panel about those non-champion projects, which is probably the majority of the world. So often we have great ambitions, and rightly so, we want to see what best practice looks like. But often it's not easy to equate it to all the other areas. So a bit of perhaps insight into that.
Non-champion projects, that's the second one. Gentleman over at the far end. And then whoever's got the microphone, lady in green, you have the floor, sir.
Sony Mumbunan from University of Indonesia. Thank you very much for sharing this very interesting...
You could speak louder, I think, actually.
Thank you for sharing these interesting perspectives. I think we begin to acknowledge the complexity of both scopes and scales. And thank you, Patrick, for pinpointing these complexities. But I personally would like, or I'm interested in knowing from a more policy perspectives from both Minister Aguirre Lombardo and then Ruiz Mejia, how do you see the way of integrating INDC with this complexity in terms of approach, but then the process of producing INDC and implementing it? So that's the question.
Thank you. It's a very clear question. Given the complexity of this approach to INCD production, how to then, in fact, describe it, particularly when feeding up, and then how to implement it successfully and direct it to our 2 legislators. Thank you. And the lady in green.
Good afternoon. I'm Attorney Dulce Punsalan from the Philippines. In the Philippines, I'm heading the Phil Bamboo Exponents and from Human Nature. I'm with the private sector. I'm also an environmental lawyer. And these 2 organizations have been awarded for best industry practice in climate change mitigation and adaptation. Now, my question for our esteemed panel would be, first, 3 I's: integration, innovation, and inclusive growth. As we are discussing state level and even micro level, how would these 3, integration, innovation, and inclusive growth, ensure that the policies that the municipal ordinances and on the national level legislation, how would you be able to convince them to properly implement all the 3 I's and eventually convince the communities, residents of these areas, so that they will be able to properly implement from the national level down to the bottom of the pyramid.
So another interesting question about how communities are engaged and participate in the process, in a way coming from a different background but similar to what Mr. Rai of Nepal said. Perhaps one more? Who's got the microphone? It's really, yes? So Madam in the front row, you have the microphone, and then Madam in the third row back, and then we will give the panel a chance to speak. Madam.
Okay. My name is Maria.
You could look at, actually, it's really nice if you were sitting in the front. You could stand and look half at the panel and half at the rest of the audience.
Okay, my name is Maria Valencia. I'm a journalist with Internews. I'm a journalist from Colombia. I was very interested with your talk, Mr. Tabaré. But I would like to know, you talk about 14 different indigenous groups living in Acre, and that they are working together with extractive people that extracts the wood. And I would like to know how that's managed, because I know this convivence, if that's a word, between indigenous people and then the peasant people is difficult in different places, like in Colombia, for example. I would like to know how Acre managed these things.
Thank you very much. And last comment from the lady, just a bit further back.
Hello, my name is Natalie Gray. I'm from the University of Washington in Seattle, United States. My question is with regards to youth involvement in the INDC. I'm wondering if you could speak a little to the importance of universities and student involvement in the INDC. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Very interesting set of questions on involvement of different groups, on non-flagship projects, on complexity and implementing in complexity, on means of integration, innovation, and inclusive action, again involving the community, and here also the challenge of involving indigenous groups alongside others in trying to get action to take place. Now, before our panel answer, Martin Frick, is there anything you wish to say at this point, knowing that we might run right up to the clock?
Maybe very shortly, yes. I just wanted to echo a bit of what has been said here, and I think that this is already now an historic COP. We've been struggling over many years to make the point for agriculture, forestry, and fisheries, and it was very difficult because in the logic of a top-down instrument, many of the member states were afraid that that would actually limit their possibilities. Now we're in a different world. We just assessed at FAO the INDCs, and there's basically not a single one which is not mentioning food production and land use. So there's a lot of political energy, and we have to harness this energy. We have to honor the political commitment that member states made to bring these sectors up to the front, to put food security at the heart of what we are doing. We often forget that in Article 2 of the UN Convention to combat climate change, food is explicitly mentioned as one of the key issues. We have 800 million hungry people on this planet, and this is unacceptable, and so stated the world leaders when just negotiating the Sustainable Development Goals. Goal number 2 says we want to eradicate hunger by 2030, not reduce, not halve, eradicate hunger by 2030. That is absolutely doable, but it needs an additional effort if we do it under the impact of climate change. But the good news is that addressing agriculture in an intelligent way brings you many side benefits that you really want to have, from gender empowerment, biodiversity, watershed management, mitigation and adaptation benefits, and even if I think about the Cat pour mille, sequestration benefits. So this is a very good moment, and I hope that one of the results of this COP is also that we start to funnel climate finance into investments, particularly in smallhold agriculture, to get the transformational change we are aiming at.
Thank you very much indeed. And now I'd like to invite Environment Secretary Magdalena Ruiz to be the first person to comment very briefly. And then I'm going to go to Minister Tabare Lombardo, and then we will come here to Dande Tavares, and then I will invite other colleagues to speak as well. And of course, Ken Alex, you will be invited to speak after Dande. Thank you. You have the floor.
Sí. Pues el nivel de complejidad de todos estos procesos que estamos viviendo de tratar de armonizar sectores agropecuarios que están ligados directamente con los procesos de alimentación, el tema de lo forestal o la conservación biológica, pero yo creo que la cuestión no solamente no somos campeones, en realidad estamos en búsqueda de revertir escenarios que sí son realmente difíciles, al menos en mi estado. La pregunta es qué tipo de producción agropecuaria queremos tener, porque los aguacates que se producen en el estado de Jalisco se van a todo el mundo, pero deforestan los mesófilos de montaña que representan el menos del 1% de la superficie a nivel de lo nacional. Y qué seguridad alimentaria también queremos tener cuando la producción de berries ahorita va a China y está ahorita consumiendo toda el agua subterránea de una manera muy agresiva. O sea, también tenemos que ver cómo estamos produciendo y qué tipo de alimentos y la huella carbono. Esa es una primera reflexión que compartiría de cuando hablamos del sector y de la seguridad alimentaria, hacia dónde se está apostando esa seguridad alimentaria. En el tema del bosque y cómo nosotros estamos integrando este proceso, estamos involucrando en una comisión intersectorial de cambio climático a la Secretaría de Desarrollo Social, precisamente para hablar de vulnerabilidad y equidad. En las zonas más vulnerables del estado son las de mayor degradación forestal, de mayor pobreza y donde están más agresivos los cambios de uso de suelo. Y estamos también trabajando con el secretario de Innovación, Ciencia y Tecnología, además para poder precisamente encontrar dónde se hacen las grandes apuestas, sobre todo en el sector agropecuario, que es donde estamos trabajando. Cerraría diciendo de que sí estamos haciendo un esfuerzo muy grande para precisamente que la línea base quede documentada y los diagnósticos están siendo acompañados sobre todo por el Instituto de Información Estadística y Geográfica, donde estamos haciendo zooms antes, identificando cómo ha habido precisamente este cambio de uso de suelo, pero también prospectivamente cómo lo vamos a estar vigilando y allí estamos involucrando a nuestros centros de investigación.
Thank you.
Ese sería
Gracias.
mi
Perfect. So thank you very much indeed. Could we quickly now hear just very briefly from Minister Tabare Lombardo?
Muy rápidamente, difícil. Pero yo diría que, sobre todo yendo a la pregunta que usted formulaba, en realidad tiene que haber un equilibrio entre lo que es el vínculo entre la producción y la ciencia y el ambiente, el compromiso, pero muchas veces no es compromiso y es la necesidad de sobrevivir que tienen los productores, y un nivel de decisiones de marco, de normas. Es decir, yo estoy de acuerdo con lo que dice la colega de México, qué seguridad alimentaria a nivel global queremos. Es decir, la agricultura es hoy fuente de sobrevivencia para 1.200 millones de personas en el mundo que viven de la actividad agrícola y 1.000 millones sobreviven de la actividad agrícola. Por lo tanto, cuando hablamos de cambio climático y agricultura, deberíamos mirar bien diferente lo que son los impactos que el cambio climático tiene sobre sistemas agrícolas de sobrevivencia, y tal vez tengamos que medir cuáles son las causas, muchas veces generadas por sistemas agrícolas generados en condiciones ambientales no adecuadas, fuera de equilibrio y solamente sostenidos con políticas proteccionistas o subsidios. Si nosotros discutiéramos cambio climático y agricultura y seguridad alimentaria sin asumir la responsabilidad que la comunidad internacional tiene en materia de subsidios, seríamos o muy ingenuos o muy ineficaces. Por lo tanto, Yo creo que acá de lo que se trata es de que tiene que haber objetivos claros a nivel de política pública, tiene que haber instrumentos, pero sobre todo tiene que haber coherencia. En Uruguay, nosotros tenemos claro que nuestro país crece hacia la exportación porque es un país competitivo. Tenemos claro que la agricultura no puede ser a costa de nuestros recursos naturales y por eso protegemos por ley los suelos y los bosques. Tenemos claro que aunque hagamos todo bien en materia de mitigación, vamos a ser, digamos, sometidos a los impactos que un cambio climático global se genera. Pero si todas estas tres cosas, además, no las desarrollo en una política de desarrollo rural, integrando a los productores familiares, para que esas oportunidades comerciales sean también para ellos, y ahí la política del Estado no tiene que ver con cambio climático, ni tiene que ver con recursos naturales. Tiene que ver con construir los bienes públicos que permiten corregir las asimetrías que normalmente hay entre un agricultor familiar y un agricultor del agronegocio. Si no logramos hilar todo eso en una estrategia, nosotros, si me permiten, en el Uruguay le llamamos el Uruguay agrointeligente y es un eslogan, es una política de Estado en el Uruguay. Es inserción internacional, intensificación sostenible, adaptación al cambio climático, desarrollo rural inclusivo y articulación institucional. Para que esto no sean discursos o no sean proyectos, como dijo el señor, icónicos, nosotros debemos tratar de encontrar equilibrio entre la política pública, entre los objetivos empresariales y entre las responsabilidades sociales.
Thank you very much indeed. And remember, you heard it here in this room from the Minister, agro-intelligent and making the links come real through effective public policy. It's hard, but it's not impossible, as we have heard. And now, perhaps Dande, you could give us, sorry about brief, it's just we really have to stop in 3 minutes.
Okay, you tried. So thank you. Gracias por las dos preguntas muy importantes para decir. Primero, en Acre nosotros hicimos en año 2000 un gran pacto por el uso de la tierra, del territorio. Aquí tenemos al señor Edgar de Deus, que es el secretario de Medio Ambiente, que ha empezado este proceso, que han puesto este gran pacto social, o sea, donde se puede y donde no puede hacer los sistemas productivos, donde están los bosques, donde están las áreas abiertas para hacer la intensificación. Y las comunidades indígenas están con sus áreas, son 34 de los 14 pueblos, y ellos tienen lo que llamamos el apoyo de gobierno para sus medios de vida tradicional. No tenemos talla de maderables en tierras indígenas. No creo que no fui claro, entonces me perdonen, pero para dejar claro, no apoyamos este proceso. La talla de maderables se da en las áreas públicas y las áreas privadas y no son en áreas indígenas, tampoco tienen la involucración de indígenas. Pero apoyamos sí la producción de maderables, sean procesos empresariales, sea en procesos comunitarios, pero no de comunidades indígenas, pero sino de comunidades extractivistas tradicional de rubber y de Brazilian nut. Es importante decir, la cuestión de justicia social no es una cuestión de hacer o no hacer, es cómo hacer. Entonces, Acre ha buscado desarrollar los modelos de negocio muy innovativos bajo el proceso de cooperativas. Ahora tenemos la más grande cooperativa de Acre que hace la producción de Brazil Nut y de rubber también. Y ellos son en 10 años han crecido como una red de cooperativas. Y ahora hacen un manejo de 3 plantas de procesamiento de Brazil Nut, de rubber, etc. O sea, creemos también que es posible hacer el encuentro de capital de sector privado con los comunales. Acre ha hecho este modelo con el proceso de piscicultura, ha hecho una industria que tiene el capital público y el capital privado. Y después de iniciado, el gobierno ha concedido sus acciones en el emprendimiento a los piscicultores comunitarios, a la cooperativa. O sea, es una forma de desarrollar, pero incluyendo los los comunitarios.
Thank you very much. And just to say, it takes time to build the trust, Dante, right? It takes time. It takes time.
It's a little bit more? Okay.
No, you have finished now. That's good. Thank you very much, Dante.
I would like a little bit more, but it's okay.
No, but that is just the whole problem. Everybody's got so many wonderful things to say, especially in this panel. Ken, Alex, just a couple of seconds, please.
All right, very briefly. First, I've had the chance to visit Acre, and it is well worth study if you have the chance. And just to give you a sense of what's at stake, Acre has 4% of the Amazon. 1.7 billion tons of carbon are tied up in that, so the preservation of that area is utterly essential. The other thing is I wanted to very quickly say about the role of local action in INDC. It's essential as well. If we can't do this at the local level, the INDCs will fail. So the key point for me, one key point is there's something called the Compact of Mayors and something called the Compact of States and Regions that are an attempt to do a consistent inventory of emissions and reductions over time. And I think that's one very important way to start to capture local emissions and reductions across all sectors and to have some consistency and build them into the INDCs.
Ken, that's incredibly helpful, particularly your second point on that instrument that can be used. And Patrick Carroll.
Well, to be short, I'll be provocative. Well, if we want to be climato inteligente, we have to think about a revolution. I'm talking here about an intellectual revolution at least. And I'm thinking about this question of champion or non-champion projects. Well, I'm not quite sure I always know what is champion and what is not champion, because we have to think a completely different way, metrics, criteria, and I'm not quite sure at the moment how an agricultural practice can be assessed in terms of job creation, in terms of biodiversity creation, in terms of resilience. And so before saying it's champion or non-champions, we have, and that was the question about the university.
Yeah.
University and intellectual people have a really strong, together with policymakers, to think about new intellectual frameworks, which would be both relevant at the local level in very diversified context and at the global level.
Thank you very much indeed. Luis, did you want to say anything yourself? Yeah, thank you. So from my side, on behalf of the United Nations system and the processes in which we're involved here, this is the kind of side event that we really like to see within the context of UNFCCC. Very experienced people, ready to share their views. Please follow them out of the room. Please stay in touch with them. Please stay in touch with each other. This is simply to whet your appetite. Thank you.